So the next question is, tell me about a conflict you had with your project partners and what did you learn? So you can mention that there was some misalignments with a certain requirements in the past, and I was not able to understand it correctly. And when I built the solution and presented to them after 4 weeks, they were not happy because they found that certain requirements has not been met properly. And what I've learned is that going forward is always pay attention to the requirements. If something is not clarifying, do check with them again and again. And it's important to create some kind of a quick POC within couple of days or 3 days, maybe on technical or maybe on paper, just to get their alignment, so that there should not be any pushback later on. The another thing could be like missing the timeline. In one of the project, I missed the timeline. In one of my initial projects in my career, I missed the timeline, and which really impacts some of the problems. So what I have learned that going forward, it's very important to communicate to your team as soon as possible that there will going to be a delay in the deliverable, and because of certain impediments. And it's important to provide the justification as well, why you can't meet the timelines. So that's what I have learned, that it's very important to communicate to your team as soon as possible when you think that you cannot meet the timelines, and at the same time provide the justification and your plan. How would you plan to complete as soon as possible. Then next thing is next question would be like tell me about roadblocks you have faced in your past projects and how did you move forward on the project. So one of the roadblock I have mentioned here, to get prioritization from different teams. So sometimes what happened is when you work cross-functionally, there could be a situation happen when you need a prioritization from different teams because of the criticality of some of the requirements. So you can mention that while working on one of my project, I realized that there is some opportunity which we can achieve and which can bring some business value, and that business value was that if we can predict the last 5 days of the revenue for each month, then it can help business partners and different line of business to get close to the actual numbers to understand their monthly and quarterly profits and the revenue. Now the big challenge for business right now is to get the right estimation of their profits for each line of business. And I knew that in order to get the answers for this kind of a business problem, we need to have a corporate data from the corporate team. So when we set up the meeting with the corporate team, we had a hard time in convincing the time to prioritize this work. So what I did to convince them is that I explained the business value of the work and the stakeholders involved in it. I explained clearly what are the challenges are required and why do we need their support. I also explained the requirements and how much time or timelines it needs. In this meeting, I also include some of the product owners and the business partners, and at the same time I also explain the benefits for them as well. What are the visibility they will get, what are the achievements they will get. And obviously I was flexible enough to trade off with certain timelines, with certain requirement as well. So this is how basically I prioritize some of my work and the roadblockers I was facing with them in the earlier call in getting the prioritization. The next question is how do you like to give and receive feedback? Again, this is not a very common question, but you should be ready and prepared for that as well. So you can mention that my approach would be called as negative as constructive feedback. So whenever I need to provide any feedback to anybody, I will call it as a constructive feedback, which basically give them an opportunity to learn and improve. Firstly, I believe it needs to be very timely, like once in 2 weeks or maybe in 3 weeks, or in certain situation it should be as soon as possible or maybe immediate. For example, if I feel that employee needs to be more proactive in their leadership and I found that there is some lacking in them, then I will explain them by saying that they are doing a really good job in the leading the team, but they need to raise the next level of the leadership, and goal would be to be more proactive when managing or when managing the team, or communicating or assigning the work to your teammates. The positive feedback, the way I will provide would be to congratulate for delivering the project in production or resolving some of the critical problem. I would send them the like a appreciation email, or maybe announcing in the team meeting. Motivate them or encourage them to take up a new work, new projects, and explain the importance of the project as well, which can bring or help them in their growth in professional career. Then another question, which again not a very common question, is how to explain technical ideas to a non-technical audience. It's very important when you are discussing your project, when you're explaining the objective of your project, or discussing the technology. It's very important to highlight what makes it a worthwhile investment rather than how the technology works, because the business people care more about what kind of a value it can bring rather than how it works. So focus on the initiative, the pain points that your audience cares most about, and your interaction will have a much greater impact with executive and other non-technical employees at your organization. So let's say, for example, that you are suggesting the adoption of new patching or monitoring protocols for your network. So you should focus your discussion on how exposure to cyber attack cost businesses like more than $600 billion in lost capital in 2000 alone, rather than going on and explaining how this technology basically works. So it's important when you are interacting with a non-technical audience. It's highly important to explain the business value and what kind of a technology you are using, rather than explaining how this technology is working and using kind of very difficult non-technical terms. So the next question is, how do you mentor people? I can explain that way, that if we hire a new people in the team, first I give them the training and a walkthrough about the process, tools, team, and ask them to start attending a daily status or the scrum call, so that they can get familiar with the team and other stakeholders. Then at the same time, I will start giving them like a small task, very small task, so that they can start understanding, start learning, and gets more confident on that. Once I can see that now they are looking more confident, and then I will start giving them more important tasks and fully involve them in the project. Obviously, throughout the office hours, I will be available for the team to clear their questions, any impediments, roadblockers, or any kind of a peer review or discussions. I will also try to understand, explore the strength and their weaknesses and their passionate level. Try my best to utilize their strength. In this way they can give their 100% and will bring value and quality to the project. And in certain cases, obviously, if possible, shadow them, motivate them, because ultimately the goal is to create leaders in the team where they can start leading and motivate to take ownership, responsibility. In the past, I have set up some learn and lunch session to encourage them to learn new technologies, or to teach new technologies, or share their product knowledge, which empowers others to learn and get more open for other ideas. So in this way, I will mentor any new people, or maybe the experienced people or an experienced employee, so that there is a good exchange of ideas, exchange of learnings among them. At the same time, if there is a new employee in the team, make sure to make them comfortable with the processes, and provide them the shadow, and make them on board as soon as possible and with fully confident with the process. So the next question is, how do you manage situation when you are behind timelines? So this is a good question. This is an important question. So my answer would be, it's paramount to be transparent about the delay, especially when some critical deadlines is about to get delayed. Provide the reasons and the justification for the delay, and you also need to explain how much would be the delay and how are we planning to complete with a new requested timeline. So let's say if this delay is happening because of certain impediments, so we need to provide how are we planning to resolve it. And let's say if this delay is happening due to some cross-functional team, how are we planning to communicate and what would be their plans. Next, very important is to motivate or encourage your team to to try their best to deliver before our new requested date. At the same time, not to sacrifice their personal or family times. At the same time, I will research also, along with my team, how can we optimize our work. That is to make sure if we can deliver this critical task even with the old timelines, and remaining things we can provide in the new requested timeline. And most importantly, to retrospect, to prepare the notes, what went wrong, what we have learned, and what are the mitigated steps so that this should not be repeated in the future. And another question, again, it's important question, like how did you resolve conflicts? Because when you work in a team or even with a cross-functional team, the conflicts are very common. So the question is, whenever this kind of a conflicts happen, what would be your strategy, and how did you resolve in the past? So in this kind of a question, always make sure that you always link and label your scenarios with your projects, so that you can explain that, hey, when I was working 2 years back on this, let's say, finance forecasting project, there was a conflict happened with one of the team members. So make sure that whenever you explain any kind of a situation, always link and label with your certain project. So here I can say that 2 years back when I was working in one of the finance forecasting project, there was a conflict happened when I was collaborating with my team members on another cross-functional team. Firstly, what I always do is to respect other person as well, their thought process. Sometimes it happens we get caught with our own preferences and biases, but it's important to listen carefully about their ideas as well. So let's say if verbal is not working, then try whiteboarding. That on the whiteboard we will draw, we will write, so that it can be easy to explain the ideas. If this is also not working, then the last resort would be to include the lead or some other domain team members or manager who can provide their insight to steer the direction in the right direction. To steer the discussion in the right direction. So let's say if I am the third person and there was a conflict between two other person, then I will listen to both the person, their reasons, thought process, their logical side, and so on. And at the same time, after listening to them, I will also provide my reasoning, like what would be the challenges of each of the approach, what are the pros and the cons. Sometimes it might be very difficult to find a black and white answer. Then my suggestion would be, let's try both the approaches, and then we can analyze and see which one of the solution is meeting our businesses, and which are logically which is much more statistical, logical, or mathematical, and at the same time whether it's easy to use, and how much time it's taking, what is the cost involved, and whether it's easy to explain or no.